Hello and a very warm welcome to Moneycontrol.com. India is revamping its competition laws after 15 years. There will be new laws now for mergers and acquisitions and of course for regulating competition. It could also mean that the CCI would be further strengthened. Mr. Sinha has been instrumental in putting together the amendments to the existing Competition Act. Mr. Sinha, thank you so much for joining us. What are the key challenges that you were looking at while drafting the amendments?
So competition law in India, Shweta, is being completely rethought, and this is really important for us because, just like we have to build the hard physical infrastructure, we have to build the highways, we have to build the airports, we have to build the rail lines, we also have to build the soft infrastructure associated with running a large-scale $3 trillion, $5 trillion, $10 trillion economy. So we have undertaken very important policy steps. We've undertaken significant revisions to many of our laws so that we have all of the soft infrastructure in place to ensure high quality competition and an innovative economy. And to that end, after 15 years, the last time substantial changes were undertaken in the competition bill was in 2007. So it is after 15 years, Shweta, that we are getting a new set of amendments to the competition bill, which are very forward-looking and which will position India right at the edge of how people think about competition law. And that's the set of amendments that were introduced through the Competition Amendment Bill 2022. There are 3 or 4 very important ones, and I'll come to that. But let me also add that in our committee, we are putting out a report which will be looking at not just the ex-post regulation of competition, which is what we're doing with the Competition Amendment Bill, but the ex-ante, which means ahead of these competitive and anti-competitive practices. And that, we think, along with the Competition Amendment Bill, will put together a framework for competition law in India that will be world-leading. Not just world-class, but world-leading. So we are very proud of the work we've done there. But as far as the Competition Amendment Bill is concerned, the one that the government introduced in Parliament, and which we have worked on over the last 3 or 4 months and had extensive stakeholder consultations on it. There are 3 or 4 things there, Shweta, that are really important for India and for companies around the world that are in India. Number one, and most importantly, there is a settlement and commitment provision that has been brought into the Competition Amendment Bill. This is very important because this enables parties, the Competition Commission of India and companies to basically come to a settlement and decide, this is it, okay, if we have done something that the Competition Commission of India objects to, we'll stop it. This is what we will do to change our behavior. This is the kind of fine we'll pay. And then that becomes non-appealable. So there is a negotiated settlement, and that's the end of it. Competitive behavior changes, anti-competitive practices stop. That's very important, number one. Number 2 is the deal value threshold. So there are a lot of tech companies that have low revenues, low assets, but are very valuable because of the technology they've developed. So if another company takes it over and reduces competition as a result of that, we could not review it. Now with the deal value threshold of 2,000 crores, it's possible for Competition Commission of India to take a look at those mergers and acquisitions and make sure that they are also not going to be anti-competitive, that they are pro-competitive. So that's a second very major change that's happened. The third very major change that's happened is a very specific definition, a specific definition of what we mean by control. So the standard that's been introduced is called material influence, which enables you to look at all situations where you think a company is going to have an adverse effect on competition.
Interesting.
So material influence is becoming the standard, and that is going to have to be very well defined by the government. But that enables you again to take a look at situations where you think anti-competitive possibilities are. So these are 3 very major changes that have been brought in, and in addition to that, there are lots of other things that are there which will improve the ease of doing business for companies as well. So the Competition Amendment Bill, after 15 years, as I said, Shweta, is a very major step forward, in particular the idea of settlement.
So what were the challenges that you feel that the amendments are going to address? Was there a pushback that you were facing from companies, or was there pressure from domestic companies to regulate the big tech?
I mean,
that's
I think
India?
all these kinds of policies are developed after extensive discussions, watching things in real life, and so on. And there were, of course, 3 or 4 things that needed to be addressed. One was just ease of doing business, as I said. Second was bringing in settlements so that we could immediately take an action, settle it, and not have to drag it out. There were lots of sort of cleaning up things that had to be done just to make sure that there's no confusion around certain issues that had resulted in a lot of litigation. So ease of doing business, bringing in clarity, transparency, these are all the hallmarks of the Honorable Prime Minister's government, and I think this competition amendment bill absolutely is terrific in that regard.
Okay, so now startups will also come under this competition amendment, competition law, because if deals...
Well, startups will come into it, Shweta, when they are acquiring or are acquired by other companies and the deal value threshold crosses 2,000 crores.
Okay.
So when it crosses 2,000 crores, previously there was only a revenue or an asset threshold.
Got it.
Small companies don't have 2,000 crores in revenue or 1,500 crores in revenue. So very often, even if you took over a company that would have a very important impact on competition in a particular market, you couldn't look at that because you were only using revenue and asset thresholds. Now you can use a deal value threshold as well, which, by the way, is how it's done in many markets, many countries around the world. So this is a big step forward.
So the big concern that this might raise is the red tape, the bureaucracy, and higher compliances. You mentioned ease of doing business, but the counter to that could be that India might get into another another level or introduce multiple layers of compliances.
Not at all, because again, the rest of the competition law is really focused on ease of doing business. If you acquire a company like that, the Competition Commission of India prima facie has to give you an opinion very, very quickly, and only if after that prima facie opinion there is a sense that there is a appreciable adverse effect on competition, that's when the more detailed review starts. So you get a very clear answer, very quick answer right away, and the vast majority of startups are not in a situation where they are going to have an appreciable adverse effect on competition. Only in very rare instances is this going to be the case, but those are important because you don't want very large companies to acquire startups that are by their technology or their intellectual property very much the leaders in a fast emerging market, and basically do what's called in the jargon a killer acquisition. So the idea of a killer acquisition is you acquire a company that you know is going to become the market leader, and then you just kill the competition that way. So that's called a killer acquisition. So you want to prevent those rare situations where a killer acquisition happens.
Okay, let's go to the definition of control, where you said that it depends on the kind of influence a company or an individual will have on that particular transaction. This also includes investments coming into the country or into a company. It could mean that even if there is, say, a 1% or a 2% stake, but if the if the influence, how do you determine that? Isn't the line a little blurred?
That's a good question. So Shweta, the point is that in practice, de facto, the Competition Commission of India has already been using this standard of material influence, and I'll give you an example. So a private equity company takes 20%, 24% stake in 2 pharma companies and has a board seat in those 2. Now suppose those 2 pharma companies end up bringing out very similar drugs which are going to compete in the marketplace. Now the private equity company, because it has board seats on both, can actually try and manage competition that way. Right? So you don't want that to happen, and therefore you can't have a situation where you define control only on the basis of what's called decisive influence, which is typically taken to mean majority control. So only if you have 51% or more of a company and the majority of board seats, that's when you have decisive influence. So you want to make sure that you're not using only that standard, because there are many examples where, and I gave you just an example where a private equity company can have board seats on 2 pharma companies and then manage competition that way. So that's why you need a better standard, and that's why you are going to have this material influence standard. Of course, in our report, we have said that this material influence standard should be stated clearly by government as per regulations. They should define exactly what that material influence standard is. Right now, that's what they're using in practice. So the case law has developed around it. But rather than just interpreting it through case law, it's better to actually have it clearly through regulations, and that's what we've recommended. But yes, that material influence standard is an important change to the way competition law has been practiced so far.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's a very interesting change, which is it's going to get, the PE guys are really going to not like this, but it's interesting changes. Does that also mean that the CCI will be strengthened further, because
so we have pointed out that the CCI needs to be strengthened. The CCI needs more capacity, more expertise. Obviously, we are now heading towards a $5 trillion economy, a $10 trillion economy, and these regulatory institutions, whether it's the Competition Commission of India, Securities and Exchange Board of India, all of these, I think, really have to be strengthened. We have to add more people, more experts, because now we have a truly world-class, world-leading economy, particularly as far as the digital economy is concerned. We are setting the standards for the world in many cases.
Sure.
And so we have to strengthen and ensure that our regulators are equipped to deal with all of these fast-moving changes that are happening globally.
I want to now come to the digital competition report that your committee has drafted. We do know that CCI had sued Google for over 1,000 crores because they felt that they were misusing their dominant position in the market. So what should big tech be expecting, or what are your recommendations on that front?
So it's very clear, Shweta, that digital markets are different from traditional markets. Digital markets are subject to winner-take-all effects because of network effects and so on. Winner-take-all markets evolve very, very quickly. These digital markets can tip and have one player be the dominant player within a couple of years, right, because of the network effects and so on. So you can't deal with digital markets the way you deal with traditional markets, and therefore competition law also has to evolve to deal with digital markets. Now, typically the way competition law works is ex post, right? So after there's been an anti-competitive practice, then you litigate against it and you prosecute it, and then you restrain behavior. In digital markets, this whole process of ex post regulation may take too long. It may take 5 years, 10 years, by which point it's a moot issue because the anti-competitive behavior has already destroyed the market or crushed competition and so on. So we need a new framework. We need a new paradigm to look at digital markets, and that's expressed through this term ex-ante regulation. So an ex-ante, you basically designate a group of companies and you say these companies are systemically important digital intermediaries, that they have tremendous market powers, and the government, and in the EU they are already doing this, the government designates who these companies are, and it's a handful of companies, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 companies like that, that have tremendous market power, right?
Sure.
Because they have tremendous market power, you have to restrain them in certain ways, because what has been demonstrated over and over again, not just in India but around the world, is that they actually use their market power in an anti-competitive way. There are many examples, right? I talked about killer acquisitions earlier. I've seen in my own personal experience many times that because they're very strong in one market, they can bundle, tie, link in many different ways into adjacent markets, and then start to control those adjacent markets as well. So what you have to do is you have to be able to restrain them in certain ways ex ante, ahead of time, and say these anti-competitive practices will not be allowed, or they have to be done in a very transparent and clear manner, and so on. And so by coming up with this ex-ante set of regulations with a small handful of companies, you can actually ensure that even in digital markets, which are subject to these winner-take-all effects, have free and fair competition. So free and fair competition is extremely important, because that's what drives innovation. And particularly for India, which is going to become, probably the first or the second most important digital economy in the world, right? We need to be able to manage our digital markets to ensure that they generate this kind of much more innovation, much more competition. So it's very important for us to start this discussion, to start thinking about digital markets differently. It's happened in the EU, it's being discussed extensively in the US, in Japan, in Australia. All these other advanced jurisdictions are also doing it, and it's time for India to really start this debate and discussion as to how we deal with these digital big tech giants that we have around the world.
So what are the don'ts that you've recommended?
Well, there are 10 anti-competitive practices, bundling, tying, trade practices with suppliers, predatory pricing, data mismanagement, data restrictions. So there's 10 anti-competitive practices that are well identified in the literature.
Sure.
And of course the EU Digital Markets Bill also has extensively gone into that. So there's a well worked out framework for all of this, but it is to put big tech companies on notice that anti-competitive practices, because of their very strong market position, will be restricted, will be regulated.
So are we looking at higher penalties? So what are the...
See, that Shweta will have to await the bill itself. So this is a report, it's not a bill,
Got
right?
it, yes.
So we are putting out a report and we're saying it's important for India. We've already, sort of upgraded and strengthened our competition law, but from a ex-post perspective, that is after the fact perspective.
Sure.
Now we also have to look at it on a before the fact perspective for these digital markets.
Right.
And that bill will have to get drafted. This bill, of course, is already ready, the Competition Amendment Bill for ex-post. So ex-ante bill will also have to get ready. The government will have to put it together and do it. Now, I will say that as a private member, I have introduced a digital competition bill as well, as a private member bill, just to show that there is a way in which we can do this kind of regulation.
Okay, lots of work, Mr. Sinha. Anything that you'd like to say for our viewers for 2023? Anything that you think is going to be the big mantra for 2023?
Well, at the end of the year, Shweta, as you know, we always say to all our family and friends, peace and blessings for the new year. In the year 2023, peace is going to be very, very important for us because of the terrible war that's going on in the Ukraine. And of course, if you think of it from a humanitarian perspective, it's a terrible tragedy what has happened there. And of course, we've had lots of extreme weather events, the flooding in Pakistan and so on. So peace, tranquility, happiness, I think in 23 will be particularly important.
Okay, well, here's to peace and prosperity. Thank you very much and all the very best. Thank you so much for taking out the time.
Thank you.